Let's explore if the typical duplex scenario is obsolete today. Here we have a 1.77 acre site, very typical 12 units. We use a Midwest duplex, which gives us 6.77 units per acre. This is based on a proposal that we had in Nebraska, and it's not what we laid out, but it would be typically what duplexes would look like laid out. Typical on a 60-foot right of way, 32-foot pavement, 25-foot setbacks, very typical of the Midwest. We intentionally used one of the better duplexes that we felt instead of a narrower or less functional one and higher density. We thought this was a good example of one of the better examples. Fairly decent living area, and this is how the square footages break down in this unit. This is called the environmental density. It's actually the environmental and economic impact of growth. We developed Land Mentor software not only to do interactive 3D and VR, but also to do spatial analysis. Now, these numbers are important, and we will get to those numbers in just a minute, but essentially what that is this is the man-made elements on the site, and the green area is the natural elements on the site, but it represents economic and environmental impacts. This slide shows where the livability is. In other words, in a typical duplex scenario, the distance between garage face and garage face is huge. And also, as we enter, the minor living spaces are quite large. So this is what we call the secondary living spaces, of which you're going to spend very little of the time as a residence in these units in that huge space. And then that brings us to the primary spaces that you're going to be living in, which is your master bedroom, living spaces, and the minuscule backyard is in this space. So this ratio is very small of livable area to service area in a duplex, and that is one of the main problems. So we introduce these alternatives that we call bay homes. It's chapter 10 of Proferbia, and it really is an answer to making the duplex obsolete with a different scenario. So this is a typical bay home scenario. Again, we look at it from a site perspective. We have 13 units or 7.34 homes per acre, single family detached, and we're squeezing that space down in that service space and increasing the space on the livable space. We do have a 24-foot private lane. We have 10 feet between the homes. Some city might require 12 feet between the homes. Well, you can still see we have extra space. We can still squeeze that 13 homes in that same area. So again, we gained one unit, and that is based on units that we are using today in bay homes, and this has been a 20-year evolution of the product. We've done thousands of these, so we have a lot of experience with the bay home scenario. Here we see the typical bay home square footage. Actually, there is no such thing as a typical bay home. They are very varied, same way as there's really no such thing as a typical twin home. We're just using good examples on both sides. In this case, there is an upper floor that we're going 1.5 or 2 stories. So at worst case, this could be a 2-bedroom unit with a little bedroom upstairs, but it could be a 5 or 6-bedroom unit. It could expand lower, it can expand higher. So it's really a unit that could be a single level, but most of these are twin levels, and almost all of them have a generous master bedroom on the first floor. From an environmental impact perspective, we have 3% less environmental impact, but we've gained one more unit. It breaks down like this. From a street perspective, and keep in mind, street is extremely expensive on the duplexes. There were 730 square feet per unit on the street. On the bays, they're on a private drive, which is far less cost typically to construct. There is 518 square foot, or 30% less. Now here's where it gets interesting. From a driveway perspective, the duplex has 729 square foot per unit. The bay home has 908 square foot per unit, which is 20% more, but we have 5 spaces per unit, which is also 20% more. So from a driveway perspective and usability perspective, it's about the same. So from a street servicing perspective, there's 30% less volume, but actually far less cost in the bay home scenario. What's far more important is this livability scenario. So when we look at the typical bay scenario, the area that is secondary, the guest bathrooms, the service area, the parking area that you're spending very little time in day to day is far less than the typical duplex scenario. So we're looking at value here. We're looking at livability. And the areas that we're using for livable spaces, the spaces that you experience every day, are much greater than a typical duplex scenario. So from that standpoint, the value of a bay home is much superior than the value of a duplex. Now let's take a look at what everybody knows, and it doesn't take a lot of rocket science to look at a twin home streetscape. It's fairly dominated by parked cars, garages, massive pavement, and this is the problem, is the curb appeal is very questionable on these. There are tricks that we have been able to do as a planning firm by not lining them up, but we're talking about conventional planning here. And what you've got is, especially in this two-car garage, or even worse, a three-car garage, is almost a warehouse look to the project, and that's also common to a lot of townhome projects, this impact of garages. Now let's take a look at it from an interior perspective, which is not bad in these units. I purposely used a fairly nice duplex, to be fair, and you enter some what I call that non-usable living space, and we've got a pretty typical upper end, fairly decent duplex. Now you're looking at a small rear yard. That's going to be the only space that these people have. They're typically not shared with a neighbor, and they're typically incredibly plain rear yards, void of any character. Now let's look at the bay home entry. We have a very compressed space using a private drive. Garages are closer to closer than typical. We have 4 extra guest parking, but we have a lot of parking per unit. Again, we're talking about 5 parking spaces per unit on average. Some of them have more, and it's quite a bit more than the duplex. From the inside of the bay home, we have a very different situation. We're added a lot of windows to let in light and let in views. We have a fairly nice large living space. We have a connection from the master bedroom into the main living space, which the duplex had. We have a little bit larger bath in this case, and we have a larger closet. However, I did use under the stairway to put the washer and dryer, convenient to the master bedroom. And again, these can be configured an infinite number of ways. The difference is this tie of space and the feeling of space from within the unit to the surrounding areas. And these are typically designs that we get involved with. We work with the architect, and in this case, we wanted to maximize the window space. We didn't need that jog in there. We could have significantly increased the living spaces in the unit, but in this case, we were after a different effect. From a living quality perspective, we want the bay homes to have a completely different living experience than the duplex. So we have a unit that could be built affordably, competitive to any duplex. However, they could upscale very easily, as you can see here, and even upscale even more than what you see here. So what we have here is a unit that's economically incredibly flexible for any situation. And they also could be used as a good perimeter development product. So what happens is along arterial streets, instead of looking at home rears or even worse, duplex rears, you're looking at fronts. It creates more of a village look. And this shows you how the parking situation is. We have tons and tons of parking. So we have even more than 20% parking because of the guest parking and the way these lay out compared to the duplexes. And again, we've got experience with these, thousands and thousands of these, 20 years experience. And instead of using someone who's this is new, We would really love to work with you, with your architects, with your engineers, surveyors, to properly lay these out. In conclusion, are duplexes obsolete? Well, you be the judge of this.